Welcome to the Factory Futurist Podcast, where we profile the thought leaders, technologies, and companies revolutionizing high-tech manufacturing. We learn from the best about how they sustain high-performance leadership in technology, their personal life, and their companies. If you're just joining the podcast, my name is Drew Allen. I'm the host, and when I'm not chatting with these fine folks, I'm the VP of Strategic Development at Grace Technologies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Today, I'm excited to have on Mike Marx. Mike Marx co-founded Indian River Consulting Group in April 1987. He began his consulting practice after working in distribution management for more than 20 years. Over the years, his narrow focus in B2B channel-driven markets has created an extensive number of deep executive relationships within virtually every business vertical in construction, industrial, OEM, agricultural, and healthcare. This is a super important message for every manufacturer, distributor, and person in the industrial automation space today as we are grappling with the devastating effects of the coronavirus. This is not his first rodeo in a crisis situation, and his extensive background is incredibly helpful here. Please enjoy this podcast as much as I have. Again, here's Mike Marx. Well, today we have Mike Marx on. I'm very excited to have him. He is quite world-renowned for his work in the industrial space. Before we get started and start talking about crises, like the current one that we are in, could you just fill in the folks a little bit about your background and why people should listen to you?
Well, because they probably don't have anything better to do at the moment they're listening to your podcast, and if the past ones have been good, this might be worthwhile. So, I mean, they're going to make their own calls, Drew. I own a consulting company. I spent my whole life in industrial distribution, been in the consulting business of over 30 years. I'm a research fellow for the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors. Teach at Purdue. Prior to that, I was at Texas A&M. I've written like 6 books, and I got a note from my mother that says I'm really smart. So we're in the middle of all this coronavirus because everything's kind of gone unhinged, and we spend probably half of our time out of the country working with distributors in industrial markets in both Asia, Europe, and Latin America.
So are you patient zero?
What's that?
Are you patient zero?
No, actually, we missed the original outbreak in Wuhan. We were several hours south, or we were supposed to. Well, anyway, we had an acquisition fall through in Guangdong that we were working on, and if that thing hadn't fallen through, we would have been sitting right there when it all happened. So I'm just, sometimes the stars align.
Oh, very good. So for today's podcast, we're going to break it up into kind of about 3 sections. The first thing I really want to talk about is where you see this coronavirus crisis hitting the industrial businesses from both the manufacturer as well as the distributor point of view. I want to then shift into where kind of, what your best practices and best advice are to leaders in a crisis. And then I want to know where you think the future is going in the industrial business for products, technology, business models, and how has this crisis shaped those futures? So let's jump into the industrial crisis first. What do you think has changed in the last few days from your calculus maybe a couple weeks ago? And you have your thumb on the pulse. Where do you feel that pulse is today?
Well, we're still there. There's basically, anytime a pandemic or anything like this works through a system, there's three parts to it. There's the recognition and the early action planning. There's the new normal, as people get used to things basically sucking. And then there's the recovery. And right now we're still, I would say, probably 30% of the way through the recognition and action planning. I mean, there are still people running around thinking the whole thing is overblown and it's a conspiracy to discredit the president. And of course, they're sitting in their own little cocoon. If you start taking a look at what's happened, China hit China first, and China now as they've closed their borders, they are done with contagion inside the country. The only cases they've had have been travelers coming in. If I wanted to go to Hong Kong right now, I have to pay for my own lodging and food and self-isolate myself for 14 days legally before I can do anything else in an airport hotel. So this will pass, but what's happened is that people are walking around now infected, because you're typically infected for, nobody really knows for sure yet, but for something like 7 to 14 days before you're showing symptoms. And so you can be passing that without symptoms to other people. And that's basically what happened in South Korea when everything went crazy. It just happened really fast. And the South Koreans, they jumped on it. They're kind of like the poster child for how to do it right. The Europeans kind of ignored it. And now Financial Times in London is tracking sort of every country, and every country is kind of going through this thing. Think about I'm sorry for the metaphor, but think about a rat going through a python. And in the States here, we haven't even really swallowed the python or the rat yet. I mean, so we got a long way to go. All the kids that are home now, I'll be shocked if they end up going back to school before summer break, which is going to be in May. So we're at the early side of it now. And what's basically happened, people are recognizing this is a big deal and they have to do something. So what they're doing is just kind of hunkering down, maybe doing some cost reduction, hopefully doing some stress testing if they're intelligent on their business.
Just for the listeners, quick, we are shooting this on March 20th. So just use that as a bit of a time marker. We should be releasing this within the next few days. So, but things are changing fluidly.
Well, McKinsey and Company, the big consulting company, if somebody goes to their website and looks, they're putting out what I consider to be high quality data, and they're updating it probably every 3 or 4 days. And they're being nice. You don't have to be a subscriber inside their network. They're putting it out in the public domain, and it cuts through a lot of the drama that we're seeing on TV. So you see what's going on. So the most important thing for anybody, and this is outside of industrial as well, any business, yours, ours, everybody needs to stress test their business. And that's what we've been doing basically for the last 5 weeks. And what you basically do is you take the company and you say, let's assume that we have a 60% decline in revenue. And how long can we last before we run out of cash, or we blow a covenant with the bank and they call a credit line? And so the step one of the stress test is how long can you last? And 60% is basically what people should be expecting to see. Now, whether it's a month or 6 months, I mean, it's a crapshoot. I'm not that smart. But what ends up happening, we've been testing people at like, 30, 40, and 60% decline in revenue. And it used to be months to die. And for some companies now, it's like weeks or even days to die, before they run out of money. So you do the assessment, see how long they're going to last. And then the second thing you do is you say, what actions do I need to take that can extend that so I can last longer? Because step one is you've got to survive. And the way you do that fundamentally, assuming you figured out how you can survive, you then, number one, protect your people, number two, protect your market share, and then number three, try to make a couple bucks along the way. But protecting your employees is most important, but there's a lot of academic research that says if you lose a customer in the middle of one of these disruptions, a lot of this happened back after 9/11, if you lose the customer, the odds of having that customer come back in the next 3 to 5 years is very, very low. So it's really important, and there's going to be huge supply chain issues as well. So people right now are just in the early stages of engaging and figuring out what they need to do to stress test and figure out how to be alive. And then things will get more interesting from there. There's really 2 steps to that.
I mean, so is it fair to say that you're feeling that the industrial distribution business, as well as manufacturers selling into large industrials like Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark and the automotives and oil and gas sectors potentially could see a 60% decline in revenue?
Yep. Absolutely. And well, I mean, you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. So the key thing is you've got to be around. And most companies, a lot of the private equity investments where they've used the purchase price 60% of debt, there's going to be an awful lot of defaults happening here probably in the next 60 days.
On a side note on that question, do you feel there's been a large amount of acquisitions in the industrial distribution business? How do you assess the stability based on the balance sheet health of kind of the industrial distribution business across the U.S.?
Everything's a bell curve, and the thing that when you're in a disruption, the most important financial statement you have is your balance sheet and then your cash flow. And most people have had a myopic focus on the income statement. How much can I sell and what kind of margin do I make? And let's try to keep our costs down. And it's all the balance sheet. So what's going to happen when people start to run out of cash, they get really panicky. I'm chairman I'm on several boards, but we're going to be acquiring a number of companies here this year, which are smaller firms. They're all freaked out about this. And what we're going to basically do is say, look, I'll give you a one-time multiple of your business now, give you some money, I'll bring you into our company, and I'll pay you the balance of the purchase price on the EBITDA that you generate in 2021. In other words, give them a timeout on 2020 because they're afraid. But a lot of these are essentially asset purchases. And what you're going to see is the guys start to run out of cash. If they get close to running out of cash, they're not going to be able to sell their company. They're going to be able to sell the assets of their company instead of a regular acquisition where I buy the name and everything else. But you're going to see an awful lot of acquisitions where the strong are going to be buying the weak. And it may not even necessarily be size where the bigs are buying the small, because some of the big guys have huge debt that they're carrying, and they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And so they'll probably be spinning off parts of their business, including some of the manufacturers. Are
you at liberty to say some of the bigs who you anticipate to see taking a hit like that?
I wouldn't touch that until I leave with Elon Musk to go to Mars. The day before, call me up, we'll violate all the non-disclosures, but then I have to get off the planet.
No problem.
There's a fair amount of that going on right now, Drew, in terms of at least the conversations, because everybody's so freaked out.
Yeah. So the first step is recognition and action planning. And what is the next step?
Well, there's really two parts of the action planning.
Okay.
The first one is you're going to say, okay, things are uncertain. You're seeing all the letters. This is the week that everybody's sending out the letters about, to our customers, and, we're on top of this and you can count on us. And it's basically, they're all generic, clueless letters that say, trust me, I'm in sales. But what's going to come out of this, people have done things like cut back on travel because they didn't have any choice. They're cut back on overtime. They're having the people can work from home, working from home, and they might have done a couple layoffs. I've got actually several people have started to do layoffs, but typically what they do is they go through this process and then they think, okay, then we go into what we call the waiting period. So I've taken my initial action, I've done all my communication, talked to everybody, and I hope I'm okay. And so I'm just going to sit around and now watch for a while. And if with the hope everybody's got is that it's going to stay stable, so this will be enough, and then all of a sudden I'm in the new normal. What's probably going to happen if some of these patterns repeat themselves, as they have in other countries, this is going to extend and get worse and worse. And then what happens, there's going to be kind of a holy crap, Batman, this is worse than I thought, and they're going to have to go back to the table and actually break what we call breaking glass. The things that they don't touch and they're afraid to touch, they're going to have to break some of them or they won't be around. And a lot of times people are afraid to do those hard things, and then they basically slide down. That's why the stress testing is so important.
Well, in our business, we had to break a little bit of glass. We had to get rid of our weekly happy hour because it was over the 10 employees.
Yeah.
Which,
right.
Sucks.
Well, there's what happens typically is when people get to that second part, it's not about dealing with hourly workers. It's really much more about dealing with senior executives and collapsing your executive team and the rest. I mean, it's just people have to make major changes and cuts based on the strength of their balance sheet. I'm on the board of one company that has been putting cash away and very conservative and has no debt. We don't even have to stress test because we could be upside down and be 60% down in revenue, and we could whine about it, but it takes several years for us to be in trouble. That's the most extreme example. But most folks, I mean, if you look at the big airlines, Delta, all the big airlines have all pulled all their cash lines in. They've hit all their bank loans, and Delta's got 1 month of cash flow sitting here in the 20th of the month. United and United's got 2 months. Southwest and American have like 3 months of cash, and then they're done. They can't do anything. So most people don't have the cash reserves to do it, and that's going to create the disruption. But there's 2 points I'd like to make. If you look at what's happened in China, and history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, they're starting to loosen up all those requirements now. And so as people start to go back to the factories, they're trying to get home after Chinese New Year, because most of them are stuck with their parents for a lot of this. But even the companies that have gone back and started production again, because everything's still closed down in narrow geographies, you cannot move product in China inside of China. Everybody's talking about their exports and putting things in containers. The biggest problem is on the road and rail transport in China right now. And it's not that they don't have the infrastructure, it's just that the regulations aren't allowing people to do it, and there isn't enough capacity and from a logistics point of view to move things around. So, and Europe's completely shut down right now. I mean, it's like a ghost town. The Munich airport, I mean, you could set off a grenade in there and not hurt anybody, and it's probably one of the busiest airports in the world. So we're going to see people are going to be running out of product, and people that want to grow. And if you want to grow, to me, the most important thing is plan on having some supply chain issues. Make sure to ration your product to your really good customers. You want to be selling, if you assume you're going to run out of product, you take care of your A and B customers first, and not the ones that are high volume, low profit, pain in the butt drain. You got to tell them, if you don't say no, you're going to end up supporting all that at low profit. You'll be out of business because you won't have product and you won't have any revenue. Sorry, I don't mean to sound so optimistic.
Yeah, I'm just trying to digest all that. I'm trying to digest all that right now. So where are things you think that people, what is some glass that you think that everybody should be looking to break? Try to break it down maybe by manufacturers versus distributors. And then where are areas where either you should double down or you think you're going to see ample return on investment through these hard times?
Well, let's start with manufacturers, and we just kind of work down, because I think you also need to talk to system integrators as well, because a lot of them are going to be very vulnerable. And that's really, if you talk about the industrial market, and if you talk about factory automation, the rest of it, system integrators are an absolute integral part, and they're very vulnerable through this. So from a manufacturer, the basic view we take is plan for the worst and hope for the best. And every dollar that you can't ship is a dollar you'll probably never see again. And so what's normally happen when people do reductions in force, they take, let's take, our executives are going to take a pay cut. We're going to forego our bonuses, and we're going to give up the country club membership. And then they gut everybody on the factory floor and all the logistics and quality and everything else. The most important thing a manufacturer needs to protect going through this, especially for the next 3 or 4 months, is their production. And so fundamentally in the Navy, what happens in a sub, there's always 2 teams. There's a gold team and a blue team, same submarine, but they just completely switch out bunks. I mean, everything just works. So they have backups. And so we've got a manufacturer that's running 24/7 now, because they figure their main competitors were in Europe and they're here domestically. And so they're running 24/7 because they figured with Europe shut down, there's going to be major shortages with competitors. So they've got an opportunity, once everybody's through all the panic mode, that they can gain some significant share. But what they've done is they, number one, they hired a cleaning crew that comes in every 2 hours, in terms of the coronavirus and sanitation and, the electric water. I mean, there's a lot of technology out there now, other than somebody you don't talk to that's sitting there with a scrub brush and a Rubbermaid cart. I mean, there's some science to this now. And so they've got every 2 hours, remember, they're running 24/7, every 2 hours, a cleaning crew's coming in there and going crazy. They've actually scheduled, and they have 2 teams for each shift, because as people are starting to lose jobs, if a lot of these positions, they're actually running a machine, and they can be treated as temporary work, and they desperately need work. And if you can get the right kind of support, what they've done is they've created a lot of backup. They're doing things with job sharing. But the whole point is that once somebody's infected, it's going to be, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning. Every company should know it's not a question of if, it's a question of when one of your employees is going to be infected. And you need to decide in advance, instead of going, what do we do? What are you going to do in terms of taking care of that employee, and how are you going to notify their coworkers? And are the coworkers going to go home and self-isolate, or are you going to try to tough it through, which is basically what's happened in Iran and the rest of it. I mean, we've got 100 people a day dying in Iran on this right now. But so if I end up getting somebody infected on a crew, because you can't control their environment because they're away from work, I have to let that crew go. And so do I have a backup? The key thing is to keep the production going. And this needs to, and normally we pay more attention to white collar workers and all the rest of it, and we cut these guys down really tight. And when you're in a massive disruption like this is the perfect time to sort of take a look at all the white collar and what major things can you change. And then one test, you'll probably like this one, Drew. Let's assume that you're president of a small manufacturing business or a distributor or system integrator. I'll ask you this question. Let's assume that all your employees came to you today on Friday, on the 20th of March, and said, I'm out of here, it's crazy, I quit. You spend the weekend on Monster.com and everywhere else, and you find qualified replacements that'll come in Monday morning. You with me on my scenario?
Yep.
Everybody quit, you got new guys coming in. On Monday morning, all your employees come back and say, we've made a horrible mistake and we have our jobs back. But they're gone. You don't have to bring them back. And the question, this is really important. What percentage of those employees, assuming you had a qualified replacement, would you rehire? And if the answer isn't 100%, those are the ones that should be going right now. And most people don't say 100%. And it's hard.
Yeah, so earlier layoffs are going to be a better.
There's so much research. All the layoffs that people do, the euphemisms, reduction in force or right sizing, there's a bunch of stupid HR words out there. But a layoff, universally, people regret when you ask them 6 months after the layoff, did you go far enough? And they said, I didn't cut far enough. And so can we learn from other people's experience, or are we going to have to learn it on our own? Because here's what happens. Some talent that you would have loved to have acquired, whether it's engineering or bring systems online, I mean, really critical talent that wouldn't have been available before, it's going to be available now, and you need to create the room. You're not trying to protect the status quo, you're trying to position yourself for something new. So you want to be able to cut deep enough that you have the headroom that you can bring in some talent. You have to say, am I playing the game to win, or am I playing the game not to lose?
That's good. Really good. Okay, so any other different pieces, or what would be the advice to the system integrators, and what about to the distributors?
The system integrators.
Most of this was towards manufacturers for the production piece.
Well, the manufacturers, it's all about production, but for all of them, it's all about preservation of cash. So it's about cash flow and what you can do with your balance sheet. It's too late right now to renegotiate credit lines. When people come out of this, the smart companies have already done this, but they set up concentric rings to protect their employees. That as the economy gets worse, these rings collapse before I have to do a layoff. Things like a 401k match, right? I match a lot. I link the match not to some socialism. I set the 401k match based on my return on asset performance or my profit. High profit, I'll match a lot. But what they do is they can reduce the 401k contributions. They can increase the medical deductibles that people have. Typically, companies will put in 2 or 3 extra holidays, and those holidays go away when the economic conditions are bad. And so you create these rings, because what you want to do is you want to invest and develop your talent so you can keep them. You don't want to treat them as fungible resources that you can just throw off the back of the boat. But it's too late to do a lot of that stuff now. If I'm a distributor, I'm faced with a lot of the same things a manufacturer is. And for a distributor, this sounds really stupid. It's their warehouse. They got to be able to ship. And when somebody gets, and the other thing is consolidating product. Distributors need to move product around so that they can have inventory that's not in quarantine areas, that they're going to have some places that are going to be completely closed down when the case count gets high. And if you have your inventory there, it doesn't matter if everything's locked down, you can't get to it. So they need to take a look to make sure what happens a lot, we'll pull the inventory out of branches and pull it into a central distribution center. One thing
I've been reading, I've been reading through the most recent one was the California shelter in place order.
Right.
Is your understanding, I mean, most industrial businesses at this point, would you consider under that order essential? Do you think that, distributors supplying goods to these pharmaceutical industries, to this, to the 3Ms of the world, do you think that those guys are going to be exempted by the essentialness kind of rules?
Right now, from what we're seeing, it looks like some, and I don't know, I can't give you a straight answer. This is changing every time I talk to somebody, but my guess is probably a little more than a third of the typical industrial businesses will be considered essential because of their customer base and where the products are going.
Okay.
And by the way, one tip, I mean, just from a commercial point of view, I need to be able to have a story from the sheriff when they come to the door to say, why are people here? And because this is how it's being enforced right now. It's already started in California. So if I'm selling to a medical device manufacturer, I'm selling to anything, you need your distributor or even your manufacturer or a system integrator, you need to get a letter from that customer, because in their medical or healthcare, if you have that letter and you put it up to the sheriff, you only need it from one customer and you're pretty much good to go. Now, I'm just making that up. That's not official. This is just sort of common sense, which isn't terribly common right now. So,
okay. What about system integrators? Any difference of advice besides conservation of cash flow and splitting up teams?
The one thing that system integrators are horrible at, they're very good at engineering. They're very good at solving complex problems. A lot of times they're terrible businessmen, and they want to get money. They want to get the business, and they figure they'll be okay. The problem is a lot of them don't get adequate deposits up front. They need to really, and this is uncomfortable. And they're, well, I'm an engineer. I'm afraid I won't get the order if I ask for a 20% deposit up front. But a lot of these people, these big companies are doing stuff, are going to be completely locked down, and it might take 6 months for them to get paid, or a year, right? If somebody's going through a receivership, and if they don't have the cash, they die. So step one is they need to be much more aggressive about money. And I'm not saying getting paid in advance, but typically what they're doing is they're integrating hardware, software, and an application where they got this thing up where they're taking a performance warranty. They're guaranteeing this water treatment plant or whatever they're doing is going to actually work. So what they want to do is they want to, schedule it out. So basically when they sign off that the system's performing as specified, I'm getting the last 20% of the money, not sending them 90% on an invoice. They need to get paid as they go along, or they're just not going to be around. The second thing is that what happens when you go through a downturn like this, people tend to narrow their suppliers and they take care of their really important customers or their important suppliers. So if you have a big plant and they've been using 3 or 4 or 5 different system integrators on different projects, they will tend to try to keep the one guy that's most important happy. So it's almost impossible if you're a system integrator to be able to go out and capture new customers in this period of deflection. Everybody's just confused. It'll be different once these other people start to fail. The one thing that's going to happen if you're a system integrator, most of them by definition are undercapitalized, so a lot of them will go away. Now the engineers and the expertise stays, but the company may split up. They may be free agents. They may go somewhere else. But the thing that's really interesting, the growth I'm going to have as a system integrator, when somebody else drops the ball because they don't have the cash and they're going bankrupt and they've left the customer high and dry. One of the things, if I was in the system integrator business, and that doesn't matter which manufacturer I'm aligned with, but what I would do is I would have a special program to go, look, there's going to be several issues with people not being able to complete. They want to, but they don't have the cash and the resources. We have an emergency fix it, get you out of trouble. And don't wait till it's really broken. When it starts to smell, please give us a call before it rots. And that's where the upside is going to happen. Because when you have a lot of small businesses, a perfect example, cleaning is really important right now. If you just kind of think about it, and that's part of how we keep healthy and people don't get viruses. But what's happened in the cleaning business, a lot of these contract cleaners have already sort of collapsed and gone broke. And there's a number of them that are squared away, professionally managed. And by the way, that doesn't mean big. It just means professionally managed, that are being able to go in and pick up these things as these other people are dropping. So the one thing to realize when you have a bad market and people start to go broke, those customers are still buying from somebody. And to you or I, we didn't go broke. It's new growth to us. So there's a real opportunity there, but somebody's got to position themselves for it.
So before we get into, so then what after the new normal, what's the next phase?
Well, the new normal is going to be slugging it out. What's going to happen once we're through this first, sort of recognition and action planning, and it all gets goofy and things settle out, right? We have the cases, the things kind of working through. It's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. But what's going to happen? Whoever has product is going to gain share. And those people that are trying to support everybody for as long as they can, they won't do well because they'll be out of product. They're going to lose their big customers. And the people that ration product that have paid attention to their supply chain are going to do a whole lot better, because if somebody needs a programmable logic control and all of a sudden the factories are shut down, there's wonderful piles of logic controls if I'm Siemens, but they're all sitting in Germany and I'm in the US, it doesn't do me any good. So you're going to see people actually changing vendors and everything else because they got to keep these systems working. And so you'll have somebody that might have been a Schneider house and all of a sudden they have to be a Rockwell house because Schneider can't deliver. And I mean, it's not a comment on Schneider. Everybody's going to be facing these problems. And the distributors and the system integrators are an integral part of what the customers can actually see. So the new normal, you're going to see a significant reduction in margin, right? Because it's the old demand and supply. Mm-hmm. A whole lot of businesses are chasing limited demand, and so margins are going to go down. And there's not much people are going to be able to do about that in this new normal, because he who has the cash wins. I got a PO. If you don't want, it's kind of like when GE said our terms are net 90 days. If that's unacceptable, don't respond to our request for quotation, right? And we're gonna see a lot of that right now. So you're gonna see people asking for extended terms and price discounts. So if I'm a system integrator, or distributor, or manufacturer somewhere in this value chain, I need to be going back upstream and saying, what can I do? If I'm a distributor, it's a lot easier because I might be buying from 3 or 4 wiring device manufacturers. And instead of sort of spreading it out, I can decide to only buy from, instead of selling what the customer is asking for, I can sell them one brand and have it work as the product is functionally equivalent. I'll consolidate my purchase instead of with 4 suppliers with one, so I'm bigger, and they'll actually start to concentrate because they figure I'm going to make it and the other guys won't. So there's an awful lot of work in terms of negotiating terms and negotiating consignment programs. I think you'll see a big pickup from the strong manufacturers. You'll see a pickup of, because think what happens to the cash flow if I do a consignment inventory from a manufacturer to a distributor. The distributor does a consignment inventory with the system integrator. When the money gets paid, everything kind of goes back and you do it via electronic funds transfer. You've seen an awful lot of that in the consumer packaged goods at the B2C, this is the consumer. And when you start looking at this, the inventory turns and velocity, the working capital to sales ratio is way better because we've taken all the extra money out that people needed to work.
Okay, so the consignment inventories. Okay, that's interesting. Do you think, so I see potentially 2 ways to that I kind of want to take a little part of this conversation. One, what do you think the implications are for international business? And 2, I mean, are we looking at a wave of, we were already seeing people moving the manufacturing back from Asia to the US. Are we looking at a massive potential wave of moving manufacturing, of onshoring our supply chains?
Well, I'm not smart enough to be able to give you a real answer, but I'm a consultant, so I can make something up. Well, but I mean, a big part of this has to do with the political environment. If you forget the pandemic, if you go back to that, we were in the middle of just turning into a giant urinary distance contest between the US and China. And we got things going on in Europe, and the new North American agreements are all kind of goofy. And so there's been a large scale retreat from globalization, which would tend to increase reshoring. But because of the fact that we have excess capacity, does the world need another wire manufacturer? Does the world need another circuit breaker manufacturer? Is there any shortage? If any company sort of goes out of business, is there any shortage of competitors that will step on their dead carcass and sell their customers? And the answer in most cases is no. I mean, it's just, there's no shortage. So a lot of this is, I think, more hope than reality, because here's the problem. I can reshore, but every business knows how hard is it to get through a price increase with the customer. So if you figure when we come out of this coronavirus thing, that we're going to come out, it's going to seem like growth. When we come into the recovery from the new normal, we'll come back to recessionary levels or something less. I mean, all the central banks globally are all worried about a global depression right now. That's why they're trying to inject so much cash in. And because of the problem we've had with deflation and just sort of flirting with it, there's not a lot that central banks can do anymore.
These numbers that the central bank, I mean, the releases, I mean, these numbers seem to be on par, if not larger than what was happening in 2008, 2009.
Oh, this is, because this is global, the impact on this is going to be significantly larger, and it probably won't be recognized till middle of the year, May, June, July.
Wow.
This is way larger than that.
All right. Well, should we move in? One other thing on okay. So we're definitely looking at some problems on the international side. What about?
By the way, just the punchline on that is there is no international business. I mean, it's the financial markets are locked up right now, waiting to see what central banks and governments are going to do, and Europe's completely closed down. Nothing's going in or out, and we're just. It's all going to come back. The question is it going to come back in a globalization-friendly environment, or are we going to get back to the parochial, let's put up our little barriers? Because globalization makes supply chains, here's how it works. As supply chains become more efficient, they get more brittle. Just in time means almost late. So if the internet went down, we wouldn't be having this conversation because it's all voice over IP. And if the internet went down, people would be paralyzed, couldn't get cash out of machines, everything would be terrible, credit cards wouldn't work. But if I was a subsistence fisherman in Bangladesh, I wouldn't even know that the internet went down. So if you start thinking about societies, as they get more complex, they get brittle. And so what's happened with this huge disruption, all this brittleness is all broken. We don't even know what's broken yet until we try to put it back together. And it takes, the interesting thing, we talk about supply chain, it typically takes a minimum of 6 months and often 12 months to build a viable supply chain. So what is the economic impact of that with all this brittleness and it's all broken? That's what people, I don't think, are really talking about yet.
What industries, the two that I'm already hearing about, I mean, obviously the oil shock, oil potentially going down to $15-20 a barrel. I mean, that's hitting oil producers, but most of those guys have built-in hedges as chemical companies. So Exxon obviously has its chemical business that becomes more profitable. So that might be up. But what industries are you particularly concerned about? The other one that I've had discussions with is the automotives. But do you have kind of a list of worrisome industries that you're that if you're focused on those industries, you should refocus on some other ones, or
if you've developed expertise and customer relationships in an industry, it's probably taken you guys a couple of decades to build it. And you don't just decide the markets I'm in that I've been in for the last 2 decades suck, so I'm going to go do something else. If you really want to go do something else, you're going to do a whole lot better buying a company rather than moving it. So it's the other thing, if you think about it, we're still analog beings living in a digital world, and people have long memories. And if I'm involved with the automotive business and people have shut their factories down for a couple of weeks, and they said, we're only going to be shut down for a couple of weeks, that's it goes to the Spanish word, or actually the Mexican usage of the word mañana. Mañana doesn't mean later, it just means not now. and not now can be a year from now. So I'd be very surprised if you see these plants opening up and getting back into production here in the 1st of April, because this thing hasn't even begun to peak yet. We're still in this country, we're still in this stage that the infected people aren't showing symptoms and they're infecting other people. And so we're going to see this big rise here in a couple of weeks. And so it'll stay close. So I think you can't change. You need to figure out, this is just a long slog. And you got to figure out a little bit of innovation and what can you do along the way. There's no easy way to get out of this. It's just, according to, this is a technical consulting term, but things are just going to suck for probably about a year.
I had two worrisome things happen to me. One, I left the gym when it was still open, and I turned on the radio, and there was a volleyball league being advertised on the radio starting April 14th. I just couldn't help but chuckle. The second, maybe more personal, worrisome one was I was actually in Chicago last weekend. I had a class canceled at Loyola, but decided, hey, I'm going to go see some friends. And I was staying at one of the Marriott properties in Chicago. And there was, I was having to wait quite a long time for the elevator. And so I was sitting there, and one of the attendants for the rooms, she was kind of waiting there with me. And I said, oh, so that toilet paper that's on your cart is going to be gold. And she goes, what are you talking about? And I go, well, haven't you heard what's going on? She's like, well, I've noticed that there's a lot of people, in the rooms. I noticed that I have to replenish everyone's toilet paper. And I go, yeah, well, this is going to get really bad. Have you heard about the coronavirus? And she thinks for a minute. She goes, yeah, I think I've heard about it. And I said, I don't think you're going to have any guests in the next week or two. And the look on her face when I told her that was of complete shock, and I still think that there's a large subset of the population that's just not ready for this.
Well, I mean, I think you're spot on the money. I mean, most of the coronavirus cases we've got right now are young people. And what happens here's the issue. This is what people don't understand. And speaking as a baby boomer, I'm in the target high risk mode. If I get the coronavirus, my at this, and again, these are preliminary numbers. I mean, think about it this way. There's facts, there's informed opinions, which if you're talking about the coronavirus, it means you're an immunologist, you're a scientist, you're a PhD, and then there's guesses. So there's facts, informed opinions, and guesses. What I have is a guess. The scientists have said we're getting early data on the mortality rate, but the mortality rate, if you're under 40, is going to be, these numbers will change, but it's like less than 1%. It's like 0.3 or 0.4 for you. If I get the coronavirus, right, because I'm over 60, my fatality rate is 10%. So it's almost 10 times high. It's more than 10 times higher for me. So what's happening, the young people can go out and go, yeah, so I get the coronavirus. I just want to get over with and be done. It's not going to hurt me one way or the other. But if one of these people and go visit one of their parents, there's a 1 in 10 chances that they're going to get their parents killed. So, I mean, and so all these, number one, people aren't aware, because you're absolutely right. And by the way, what does it say about a company, for that contract cleaner or that maintenance person at that Marriott property, that they haven't explained the risks to their employees? And there's so many safeguards that have been put together for people that are cleaning. I mean, you can go to ISSA.org, which is the International Sanitary Supply Association, which is part of the Global Biorisk Advisory Council is part of it. I mean, there's a bunch of heavyweights that are there, and there's all kinds of things that could have been done to protect that person.
Right.
But the fact they didn't even tell her, what does that say about they're more worried about their money than their talent and people, So, sorry,
well, I think actually that's a pretty good segue into the second portion of this conversation. Talk to me about leadership in crisis. What is the executive? What do the floor managers need to be, the attitude that they need to be taking, their communication strategies, and what do executive leaderships and system integrators, distributors, and manufacturers, what's the tact and the tactics and strategies that they need to be putting in place besides kind of the business safeguards we discussed earlier?
Well, the business safeguards, that should have happened on day one, and it needs to be monitored and maintained. But in a crisis, leaders lead. And I mean, if you look at history, history's the same thing happening over and over again. I mean, if you can go back long before the bubonic plague was the I can't remember, it started with an A, but it was a virus that went through and killed, it basically destroyed the Roman Empire. And what happened when Marcus Aurelius was Caesar back then, he saw what was going on, and they went through they sold all kinds of royal possessions and generated cash because all their coffers, they couldn't get the taxes. They had a big financial problem. And then he stayed there and led through the whole thing. And while people were dying, and a lot of the executives, the sort of rich people where it's all about me, screw everybody else. I mean, at some point they'll all die out. But a real leader is going to be concerned with people, and I mean, there's so much stuff that's out there in terms of what they need to do. It's like there's an old saying, again, from Marcus Aurelius, that says, stop talking about what a good man should be and just be one. Mm. Most people actually know, and it's basically, I mean, sort of does that leader have the courage to do what needs to be done, which is making hard decisions? I mean, a lot of people, it's like, oh, this is painful, I don't want to do it. I love my Doberman puppy so much, I can't bear to cut off its tail, so I'll do it 1 inch at a time. And that's not leadership. Mm-hmm. So do they have the courage to do what needs to be done? Because they're the ones that are in charge. Do they have a sense of justice and fair play and thinking about people instead of, how do you find the balance of all of this? And do they have just sort of the wisdom and the critical thinking? And so what you're finding is a lot of people they have titles, but they're not really leaders, and it's going to be exposed. I mean, one of the things that happens is a lot of this stuff will sort itself out as let's just say a crisis is a good way to sort out a lot of the BS that people are slinging around. And if we all end up sitting there going, holy crap, we're in a big pile of doo-doo, what are we going to do about it? And off we go. So nothing wrong with a little bit of honesty.
A little bit of honesty. All right. Well, let's just turn to a little bit of the future. Where perhaps your calculus was at the beginning of the year, where you thought, the technological trends were leading in the industrial market, the business model trends. First of all, what were they? What do you think the major trends are? And how do you think the coronavirus has changed that calculus from your part?
Two different things. I think all the coronavirus has done so far is distract everybody. Okay. And will probably accelerate the emergence of a lot of those trends that are maybe on the outside. One has to do with digital and just taking processes both inside and outside the company that are digital, that are analog, and making them digital. And we have spent a lot of time. We actually teach that course in an executive program at Purdue. But one of the things that I think is going to happen, you're going to see changes in the role of the sales force. The general line self-directed salesperson is rapidly going to become a thing of the past. Forrester did a study back in 2015 and said there's 4.5 million B2B salespeople in the U.S. And by 2020, we're going to lose 1 million of them. And it happened in 2019 because a lot of them are being replaced by inside sales, online ordering, punch out, computer to computer in terms of supply chains. And so a lot of the sort of the traditional deal of the sales guy is going to go out and build relationships. That you're going to see massive changes in how companies do sales and marketing as we go forward. I think from a factory floor point of view, the big thing for me, and I'm definitely on the outside looking in on this. So you ask me, I'll tell you what I think. But remember, I'm old enough that I did drugs in the 60s, so this could all be wrong. But there are a number of major global manufacturers that are trying to, everybody wants to get into the Internet of Things, and that's kind of like the latest, greatest. And it's kind of, if you go back to the early days of the automobile, we had over 130 automotive manufacturers in the U.S. and they all basically went away, and you're seeing an awful lot of that right now. But the big guys, what they're trying to do is, and I'm going to be very careful and not name names, but what they want to do is, I want to lock you up in my ecosystem. I want you to, whatever my brand is, I want to have my brand everywhere and all the rest of it. And this is kind of like the old Betamax and VHS tape wars. And open systems are where it's going to go, being able to play with other people and locking it up. And I think those models were really appropriate. And I think when you start looking at business models and how do you actually design a business model, locking somebody up, I mean, just think about how excited you are with all your software and with Google and Microsoft and Apple and everything else pulling you into the ecosystem where it's hard for you to get out. People don't like that. I don't like to be held hostage by somebody that tells me they're going to take care of me and love me and it's all going to be great, because I know that's not true. So, having open competition, I think the guys
just a quick little survey of my engineering team shows a extreme preference for Android over Apple.
I can tell you a lot about that, but one of the reasons that Android has gained so much share is because they're allowing it to be an open system and let people play. One of the things to me, can I talk about your company just for a bit?
Sure.
You're an Encompass partner with a company called Rockwell. And one of the things that Rockwell's done is they've said, look, we want to build an ecosystem. We're going to focus on the analytics, because that's the part everybody's leaving out. We got all this data, nobody knows what to do with it. We've got, I forgot what the number is beyond an exabyte, but now they're talking about things beyond exabytes. There's like already 220. The number's so big, I can't even do the zeros. I'm too old. But all this data is out there. People aren't doing the analytics. The analytics is how do I take this information and make better resource decisions to stay in flow? And the guys that are trying to wrap it up and be the one stop, your engineer guys going with the Android, they're going with it for a reason, because they want the capability, but they want the freedom as well. And I think the freedom model is going to work a whole lot better than the integrated, I own your life. So I think that's going to end up shaping a lot of this. And I think a lot of the Internet of Things, I think we're going to see huge changes very rapidly that were already underway. I think the pandemic just kind of slowed things down. And frankly, you have to ask, thinking about your engineering guys, and I won't put you in the spot, but as long as everything's going to be sucking for the next 3 months, there's probably an awful lot of engineers say, this is a great time for us to engineer version 2 of whatever it is we're doing. And you're going to see a bunch of really cool new stuff coming out.
So you're pretty bullish on the creativity being, the extra time available about kind of creativity being released, huh?
Well, look at the difference. If you were a weak company, right, and your employees start figuring out we're going to cutting off the puppy tail 1 inch at a time, and every other week you're doing a layoff, and all of this, there's not going to be a lot of creativity and energy other than doing a resume and looking for another job. But the thing is, if the company's strong and they've got a good balance sheet and they're clear, it's a wonderful opportunity. I mean, the social distancing and doing this whole deal is actually, I mean, there could be an awful lot of interesting things going on. But I mean, in terms of where this is going to go, I think the open systems, kind of like, well, I think a lot of people are starting to go that way instead of trying to do this. Just it's really hard not to name names in this, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think the open system is going to work. I think the analytics are the key piece that's missing, because part of this is, and when we do big data, we teach this in the Purdue course at University of Innovative Distribution. It's easy to find all the data. People go, well, now they have it. What do I do with it? And the key thing is the information should allow you to make better resource decisions so that you can get better output out of your plant and do all the rest of the things you're trying to do. And it also improves safety and the rest of it. But if you don't have the analytics, none of it does you any good. And so there's typically, as you see this AI thing going on, my son designs AI chips. That's what he does. He designs computer chips, and I understand maybe 20% of what he does. But the AI chips are going to be eliminating people, right? Instead of having software that can sit here and run something, it's when you start looking at what's happening with AI, and you start looking at blockchain, we're going to see major disruptions in our workforce and how this is going to go. But I think if I look at industrial automation, we are entering what I think is going to end up being the Wild West for probably the next 2 decades as this thing goes. And it will end up turning into a growth industry, because what you're going to see is you're going to see the convergence of the hardware guys, the software guys, and then they're going to be putting a lot of this AI on top, which is going to, really lower a lot of the factory stuff in terms of headcount and the rest of it. I mean, there's huge issues in terms of what happens. These people don't have jobs anymore. But I mean, and that's for your generation. I'll be dead by the time people sort that out.
Universal basic income, I guess. We're all going to be getting a check here, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and at this point, I hope it doesn't bounce.
Well, on that note, Mike, is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with, or any other piece of advice you want to pass on?
I am. In terms of this pandemic, it bothers me that people aren't taking it seriously, and the ones that aren't taking it seriously we're going to pay a bigger price because we don't. But this too will pass. I mean, it's just, this is the blip. 9/11 passed. I've been through all kinds of stuff. I mean, sorry, we're not going to talk about the Vietnam War. But there always seems to be something, and we'll get this done. This will be behind us, and maybe we'll do something better about healthcare. Maybe we'll, let's be optimistic. But this will pass. Life will go on. Companies will still compete. This is just there's. Do you have any kids, Drew?
I got a 2-year-old boy and a 4-year-old boy.
All right. Well, here's the deal. Well, they're going to turn into teenagers, and the key thing is that really good parenting means you didn't actually kill them when they were teenagers. You let them actually grow out of it and continue to live. But at some point, but I mean, you have all this drama. It completely messes up your social life, and then all of a sudden it's gone, right? And then you end up with your kids out, and they don't have time for you. So, but it seems there's always a pile of poo in your plate, right? You got little kids, it's taking all the time. You got to drive them around to karate lessons and Boy Scouts and girl, whatever. But that pile of poo will just change at some point. You have another pile of poo. So we always have a pile of poo. Right now it says coronavirus, and whining is not an exit strategy, and hope is not a strategy. And this is just our pile of poo. So Mark Twain had an old line. He said, if you got a bunch of tough things to do, the very first thing you should do every day is eat a live frog, because everything else will seem easy. And so it's kind of like, suck it up, get a life, and just deal with it. And when this is done, we'll have another pile of poop. And you'll miss the kids. It happens really fast, man.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. And how can people reach you?
mmarks at IRCG.com, MMARKS at IRCG.com. So, and I'm pretty good at email because we're all working from home now, Drew.
Well, thank you very much for all your advice, and have a great day.
All right. I look forward to chatting. It's really important for the next couple of months that you don't lick any doorknobs.
No licking doorknobs, everyone.
Yeah, that's the key point. All right, man.
Thank you for listening. I'm Drew Allen. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.